In the early morning hours of September 29, 1997, the Placer County Sheriff's Office gets a 911 call about a young woman wandering along Interstate 80 in Auburn, California. She says she's been kidnapped and raped.
Dispatch called me at home and asked me to go to the hospital. The victim was very shaken. She was obviously upset. I think that she was very relieved to have survived this ordeal.
She is able to tell the police what happened.
She had been walking home from her school, and she was walking down Washington Street in Reno, Nevada, when she heard a vehicle come up behind her. The victim told the officers that a female was driving the van and that the male gave her instructions on how to get to the freeway from where they were.
She wasn't sure whether this woman was also herself a captive in some fashion. She attempted to get some support or some help from this woman who was driving the van. Eventually, the victim realized that this woman was assisting this man in this abduction. They then took her across the mountains to Auburn. In the course of this abduction, there were a number of sexual acts performed on this woman.
Throughout the ordeal, she tried to maintain a sense of calm. She was scared beyond belief because she thought they were going to kill her.
They're playing Johnny Cash's song, Folsom Prison Blues, in which he has the line, "I killed a man in Reno. I sat and watched him die." She asked him whether he had ever killed anyone before. This obviously a question that's very much of interest to her. And he says no, he hadn't.
I think the term sexual predator certainly applies to these two offenders. Offenders who engage in sexual behavior that is sadistic, that is, where they're deriving sexual pleasure from the suffering and humiliation and control over another victim. They lack the ability to care about another human being.
Her intent was to remember as much about him as she could so that she could identify him if she survived this ordeal.
After hours of abuse, the couple finally drops her off on a deserted road in California, more than 90 miles from where she was kidnapped.
The van pulled up here, somewhere in this area along here. The victim had already been instructed to get dressed. At that point, when they stopped the van, she was given her purse and her backpack.
It warned her not to go walking by herself anymore at night in Reno, and said that she was very lucky that she had been picked up by two such nice people. And at that point, they let her out of the van, told her to turn her face away, count to 20, and then they drove off.
The woman walks toward the interstate where she flags down help. Although in shock, the victim gives detailed descriptions of her attackers.
She made sure to look around her surroundings, to remember the faces that she saw. She listened to their voices. She remembered the smells. When the male was talking to the female suspect, that he called her Mickey.
The danger of criminal pairs is that they will often do things that are more extreme than a single person would because they're feeding off of each other, mutually reinforcing different kinds of deviant behavior, and actually sometimes escalating over time because they're validating each other's ideas and ultimately engaging in acts of violence that would be more pronounced than if it was just one person.
Police developed composites of the suspects and put out an APB for them and their van.
After we got the composite sketch and distributed to the news media in California and Nevada, we started following up leads that were coming in. We did canvass the area where the victim was abducted. We went from business to business and from residence to residence, looking for any information that we could find.
Because the victim was taken across state lines, the FBI is notified.
It's pretty rare to have a male and a female together doing a sexual assault of a stranger. So that definitely gets the hair on the back of your neck up, that you have a pretty dangerous predator pair out there. And historically, there have been some pretty significant male-female teams that have operated in this area. In the 1980s, Gerald and Charlene Gallegos were a male and female kidnap, rape, and murder team that were operating in the Sacramento area. They had, I think, about 10 victims.
The Gallegos dumped one of their victims in Clipper Gap, where the young woman, abducted and raped from Reno, was recently let go. Authorities fear there may be a copycat on the loose.
These are high priority cases for the FBI. These people who are out there that might be getting ready to prey on another victim need to be addressed as soon as possible. So in these kind of cases, we drop everything, get out there and start developing leads, recovering evidence, doing interviews as soon as we possibly can.
More than a month passes without any of their efforts paying off. And the case goes cold. November 3rd, 1997 is a slow night at work for 17-year-old Linda Marshall in Pleasanton, California.
There was another sexual attack in which both of these people attempted to have sex with this woman. They beat her. They ended up taking photographs of her, and they said, well, if you tell what we've done, we're going to let these photographs out, and we're going to blackmail you. Eventually, she, of course, was afraid that they would kill her.
When she is released, Linda goes to the police. But instead of telling the truth about her attackers, she lies. Linda is afraid of them and aware of the photos they possess. She claims she was abducted and raped by 3 men. Her story seems suspicious to the police, and when they confront her about her inconsistencies, she drops the case.
These individuals will tend to increase in the complexity of the behavior that they're engaging in, sometimes seeking more extreme or more diverse kinds of behaviors in order to get the same degree of fulfillment. The lure, the fantasy, and the acts that they engage in for their own sexual pleasure are too powerful for them to want to resist. Many of them, particularly when they're engaging in extreme violence and sadism, do not stop on their own.
In the fall of 1997, Auburn, California authorities searched for 2 suspects in a kidnapping and rape case. With only descriptions of the perpetrators, a male and female teen, and their van, and unaware of any other crimes committed by the couple, the police run out of leads and their case is at a standstill. On November 19, 1997, Sacramento police officers respond to a residence to take a report on a possible sexual assault. 2 teenage girls tell officers they were both raped at different times by the same couple.
The most shocking revelation was the fact that one of the girls was molested by her own mother and provided to her boyfriend for sexual purposes.
The kind of offender that would give up their own child for sexual abuse to another offender and even participate in that abuse and exploitation is just as culpable of an offender and likely shares similar kinds of deviant fantasies and impulses, and is the kind of a person who similarly is unable to have any compassion or caring for that child.
There is more to the story.
The 2 girls had also told us that they had seen a report on TV a few weeks prior about a kidnap rape out of Reno, and the descriptions of the male and female suspects as well as the vehicle were very similar.
The girls give investigators the names of their attackers: James Froggy DeVeggio and Michelle Mickey Michaud.
Within a day or 2 of the Reno kidnapping and rape, Michaud and DeVeggio knew that the authorities were after them because the composite of DeVeggio was published in the newspaper and it was on television. So they certainly knew from the very beginning that the police had reason to suspect them.
And I ran record checks on everybody involved and found that DeVeggio was a registered sex offender who had just recently registered in Sacramento, and that Michelle Michaud was a prostitute who had been arrested for prostitution several times.
Police are not surprised to see that each has a long history of offenses.
James Anthony DeVeggio was born in 1960 in San Francisco, California. He had a very unhappy upbringing. His mother was the dominant personality in his household. He was involved in various sex crimes, even as a juvenile. He had many difficulties, psychological difficulty, a lot of baggage, a lot of rage, a lot of anger at women, especially. Michelle Michaud was 2 years older than James DeVeggio. Grew up in the Sacramento area. She ran away from home when she was 17. She encountered a pimp who turned her out, put her on the street. Eventually, she wound up working in massage parlors.
James DeVeggio and Michelle Michaud met in October of 1996 in a bar where DeVeggio worked.
Michaud and DeVeggio were primarily drawn together because of their mutual addiction to methamphetamine.
Methamphetamine is a psychostimulant, and when people take in methamphetamine, whether they're shooting it up, whether they're snorting it, or whether they're smoking it, what we typically see with a person who's intoxicated with meth is euphoria, a increase in their level of impulsiveness. Paranoia can be part of it, aggressiveness, fighting, delusions. A person can lose contact with reality. Basically, an erosion of the value structure that they had. And if they didn't have a good value structure to begin with, it's going to go further downhill and more extreme acts are going to be more likely.
Michaud and DeVeggio tended to project onto the other what they wanted to see in another person. And Michaud would say later that she perceived DiVeggio as being this strong fatherly figure that around which the family could coalesce. I think DiVeggio, Froggy, saw her as somebody who was willing to do anything to please him, as he always expected women to do.
A person who is treating women as objects, as Mr. DiVeggio did, very well could recognize the opportunities that addiction to methamphetamine might represent. That is, he may see that if the person that he's involved with, for example, Michelle Michaud, is hooked on meth, and he's the guy that can fund that habit or provide that methamphetamine, he very well could use that as a way of controlling her.
The fact that Michaud is a prostitute and DiVeggio is already a sexual predator makes them an ideal match.
You've got a prostitute whose job is to basically use her body as a commodity to sell herself, and willing to engage in a lot of different scenarios. That is the perfect counterpart for a man who will treat her as an object for his fulfillment. So they hook up, and you've got the perfect storm for escalation of behavior.
The more investigators look at the duo, the more disturbing the revelations.
Michelle Michaud is a very interesting personality. She had the capacity to seem to be different things to different people. You could look at her, and I mean, the priest at the church would say she's a wonderful mother. She bakes cookies for the PTA. That was the image that she gave to the priest. At the same time, she could go over to the bar and curse and brag about being a hitman for the mafia or the Hells Angels or whatever.
James DiVeggio had an obsession with serial killers. He was fascinated with them. He had a series of trading cards that depicted serial killers, sexual serial killers specifically.
Because he wanted to emulate or wanted to get their notoriety. He wanted to make his mark.
DiVeggio was particularly interested in a pair of killers, Gerald and Charlene Gallego. Charlene would assist Gerald in abducting young women for him to rape and kill. A concept that appealed greatly to James DiVeggio.
The fact that DiVeggio and Michaud tracked prior cases that were similar to their own is not unusual. What it reflects is that this is very much a part of who they are, their fantasy life, and is not extraordinary in this population of people. We all have heroes, and if you're a violent criminal who does sexually sadistic things, you're going to be attracted to people who have done similar things.
Michaud's daughter tells police that the two are living in their minivan, on the run from DiVeggio's motorcycle gang.
The Devil's Horsemen. They accused James DiVeggio of having stolen a safe containing some amount of club money. So they took away his motorcycle and they drummed him out of the club.
Over the next few days, Sacramento police issue an arrest bulletin for James DiVeggio and Michelle Michaud for the sexual assaults on the two minors. They also contact authorities in Auburn.
When suspects live as these two did in their vehicle, you do the same thing you do in every other case. You talk to people who know them. You follow up on where they last were. You ask a lot of questions. You try to find out where they are.
Sacramento supplies Auburn with mugshots of the two, and the woman who was assaulted makes a positive identification of both her attackers. A manhunt begins.
We assembled a team of 20 FBI agents, along with county sheriff's officers, state parole officers. Everybody with a gun and a badge went out and flooded this area and started finding everyone who knew these people and interviewing them.
As the search for the predators continues, James DiVeggio and Michelle Michaud check into a motel in Pleasanton, California on November 25th, 1997. DiVeggio knows the area well. He went to high school there.
Pleasanton is considered an upper middle class type of community. Most of the crime that we have in town is specifically property types of crime. Very little violent crime, 1 or 2 homicides, maybe a year at the most. They had come into Pleasanton a couple of times and actually looked at specific people that they felt would be targets for them to kidnap.
DiVeggio and Michaud are just like any other criminals that stalk their victims. They look for victims that are vulnerable. They look for victims that are in situations that make them easy prey.
They spend Thanksgiving at the home of DiVeggio's ex-wife and her current husband. Among the other guests are DiVeggio's 15-year-old daughter. At dinner, DiVeggio and Michaud talk openly about their criminal ambitions.
The two of them fashioned themselves as serial killers, so I think that they were basically building themselves up to commit more and more heinous crimes as time went on.
In late 1997, the FBI and authorities in Northern California are on a manhunt for serial rapists Michelle Michaud and James DiVeggio. The suspects are living out of their van, driving around aimlessly, doing methamphetamine and picking victims at random.
Constant meth use by the person who is already a sexual predator is more likely to make them act out further and in more extreme ways.
DiVeggio and Michaud go to have Thanksgiving dinner with his first ex-wife and his children by that wife. And after the dinner, DiVeggio and Michaud decamp to a motel because DiVeggio can't stand his first ex-wife's husband. So the daughter's at the motel with him, and during the course of this evening, DiVeggio attempts to have sex with his daughter. She repulses him, but he insists and he goes ahead with it. It turns out that he's probably done this 4 or 5 times previous to this.
Mr. DiVeggio is psychopathic. He does not have the capacity to bond with other human beings in a normal, healthy way, nor an ability to empathize with them, and views others as objects for his exploitation and personal pleasure. He's a predator in the truest sense of the word.
DiVeggio and Michaud are oblivious to the size of the manhunt currently underway.
The FBI, working together with the sheriff's detectives and all the law enforcement community in Sacramento, was out beating the bushes looking for them.
The suspects continue their drug-fueled quest.
DiVeggio and Michaud talked frequently about going on a hunting, looking for a victim to get.
Sexual predators who engage in these kinds of opportunistic and predatory behaviors will often choose strangers because it puts distance between them and their offenses. But the victim pool is often selected by availability and their own assessment of whether they can get away with the crimes or not.
Authorities become aware of another attack by Michaud and DiVeggio that took place sometime after the Reno kidnap and rape.
picked up a prostitute in Sacramento.
This woman understood exactly what was going on and was able to fight DiVeggio off and get out of the van. They sped off. It was a very close call, so it may have been that DiVeggio realized that in order to immobilize any more victims in the future, he would have to find some methodology of, restraining them in some fashion.
The next victim will not get away.
Modus operandi will evolve in these cases. The kinds of things that they're doing to their victims tend to be similar: humiliation, domination, torture. But the way they get there and the way that they avoid getting caught and control their victims, that will change in response particularly to situations that they view as near misses, close calls. People are smart and they adapt.
He'd taken the seats out of the van. He had made the fastening so he could tie someone down. It's clear that he's thinking ahead. And they decided to go off and do a hunting.
But hunting costs.
During this period of time, they have no money, right? And so Michelle Michaud has qualified for welfare. And so she's getting a check now for welfare of $500. Of course, she's going to turn this immediately over to DiVeggio. So as they're doing this preparation, as they're preparing for their hunting or their adventure, as Michaud would call it, they eventually go to a store. And they bought a gag. And the reason they did that was that they could put this gag on and the person, whoever they got, would be unable to make any noise or scream loud enough for anybody to pay attention to them. So it was clear that they were prepping, they were getting ready to do their adventure.
Perpetrators will pre-plan so that they can accomplish their fantasies. The purchase of these items tells me that these were parts of his fantasy, and he wanted to be prepared so he could enact those dimensions into his interactions with these victims.
As the news of the suspects gets out, Linda Marshall comes forward and tells the truth about her rape in Pleasanton.
The reason that she didn't tell the police who these people were, their identity, is because she was afraid of them. She was afraid that they would kill her. She was friends with one of their daughters. She knew them by name and by sight.
Authorities now wonder how many more victims may be out there.
This case was unusual. Michelle Michaud and James DiVeggio were indiscriminate in their victims. They preyed on their close family members, their own children. They preyed on acquaintances. They picked up a prostitute. They preyed on a young Reno college student. They were all over the board.
So they're already a person who doesn't care about other people and is all about pleasing themselves. The addiction aspect of it will make them much more impulsive, much more moody and erratic and unpredictable. And it will overall just intensify their risk for acting out and doing so violently.
It's a hell of a scene.
In this season of the First 48, detectives work harder than ever.
Need a wanted flyer for first-degree murder.
With the race to solve the case even more critical than before.
I know somebody saw something, and that's all I need.
We need to find somebody tonight.
The First 48, next on CI.
It's early December 1997. For the past 9 weeks, sexual predators James DiVeggio and Michelle Michaud, fueled by methamphetamine, have been stalking and raping victims at random. But so far, a manhunt by local and federal law enforcement agencies has come up empty.
Our arrest bulletins go to all local jurisdictions surrounding the Sacramento area. I know the FBI put out information, their mugshots, a description of what happened, a description of their van, and the fact that their whereabouts were unknown at this time.
When we get information from Sacramento saying that these people have warrants for a serious crime like a kidnapping, a rape, we're taking this very seriously.
Because DeVeggio and Michaud are constantly moving, the police can't get any leads. The couple make their way back toward Pleasanton. They drive around all night, doing meth and talking about hunting.
At some point after making all these preparations for the hunting or the adventure, as Michaud called it, they drove around Pleasanton, where he'd grown up.
On the morning of December 2nd, Vanessa Samson leaves home to walk to work, less than 1 mile away.
And they're really twitching along, as the phrase goes, in methamphetamine. DeVeggio is working himself up and seeing all of these places where he had been put down and rejected in Pleasanton is just fueling his rage.
Vanessa is a lively, beautiful young girl who is 22 years old and the apple of her father's eye. She was his best friend, his fishing partner. Everywhere she went, she brought light into the room. She has a beautiful smile. Baby of the family, has a sister and a brother and a mother, very close family. Just a wonderful young lady.
The fact that his victim is bound in the van, on her back, with her hands so that she can't move, with a ball gag in her mouth so she can't cry out for help, and blindfolded so she can't see what's happening to her, is really an evidence of how important the sense of powerlessness is in his victims. He didn't want her to be able to see or know or predict when she would experience pain or humiliation. So it's an example of how extreme his need was for control and domination.
At noon, Pleasanton police receive a call from Vanessa Samson's mother reporting her missing. But Vanessa hasn't been gone long enough to file a report.
In these cases, we rarely jump right to the conclusion that something bad has happened, that a crime has happened. You know, 65,000 people in this community and another 150,000 that work here. It's not uncommon to have a lot of missing person reports. Very few of them, practically none of them ever turn out to be a kidnapping.
Michelle Michaud drives north toward Sacramento as James DeVeggio repeatedly assaults Vanessa Samson in the back of the van. Low on gas, she pulls into a gas station to refuel and buy food and cigarettes. They then pick up Michaud's welfare check in Sacramento and head to South Lake Tahoe, where they check into a hotel.
They made a number of stops along the way, many of which, had Michelle Michaud chosen to, she could have freed Vanessa Samson.
DeVeggio and Michaud smuggle Vanessa into the room and continue their brutal attack. That night at 10 p.m., Vanessa Samson's mother calls the Pleasanton Police Department for the second time. Officers review the case once more and now file a missing persons report.
This was a very responsible young woman who led a responsible life. And for somebody like that to just suddenly disappear off the face of the earth, not respond to pages, not call her parents, not call her friends, not talk to her boyfriend, not go to work, all of those things were just very unsettling to everybody involved.
Police alert the media about Vanessa's disappearance.
Vanessa Samson left her home at approximately...
The next day, officers canvass the neighborhood to see if anyone may have seen or heard anything. Friends and relatives gather to spread the word. DeVeggio and Michaud take Vanessa and check out of the hotel. As Pleasanton police investigate Vanessa Samson's disappearance, they are unaware of the ongoing manhunt for James DeVeggio and Michelle Michaud. After a thorough canvass of the neighborhood, the police work their first lead.
Well, what happened was a homeowner working on this house that's directly behind us here, he was up on that house with a friend of his when they heard a noise, a short, sudden scream. At this point, they both stood up, and what they saw was a green, newer model van driving away from this location to our right. They observed that there was a woman driving with long, dark hair.
Police search the area for any clues. They find nothing. That same day, federal and local law enforcement officers from Reno and Sacramento continue the hunt for Michelle Michaud and James DeVeggio, who are now wanted in connection with 4 kidnapping and rapes. DeVeggio and Michaud drive aimlessly around South Lake Tahoe before checking into a motel across the street from the courthouse where Michelle has to appear for writing bad checks.
The fact that they stopped in the midst of their drug binge and these horrible crimes that they're perpetrating is not unexpected. They're clearly in control and know what they're doing. So it suggests to me that despite all the drug use, that despite of the horrible crimes they're involved in, they clearly know right from wrong.
They don't know it, but the law is closing in on them.
Once our agents found out, they were able to learn that Michelle Michaud had come up to Lake Tahoe here to go to a court appearance. We were able to find out that that court appearance was at the Douglas County Courthouse right across the street from where we're standing. Information then came that Michelle and James usually stayed at a hotel right across the street from the courthouse. So we immediately came over here to the Lakeside Inn and Casino and were able to confirm that they were staying here. A couple of the agents went and checked the casino floor looking for the suspects and were able to find James DeVeggio and take him into custody right on the casino floor.
Capturing Michelle Michaud is more complicated.
After James was arrested on the casino floor, we devised a plan whereby I would dress up in a security uniform from the casino here and try to get Michelle to open the door so we could arrest her. So I knocked on the door and told Michelle that James had collapsed on the casino floor and was asking for her. Finally, after a lot of knocking and explaining through the door, she finally opened the door, and at that time we were able to grab her and pull her out and take her into custody.
The couple's van is impounded. There is no sign of Vanessa Samson. 2 months after their crime spree began, James DeVeggio and Michelle Michaud are under arrest. Authorities from the FBI, Sacramento, and Auburn are eager to talk to the suspects.
During the time that I spent with Michelle Michaud, I thought that she was very manipulative. She was willing to speak to us about what had happened. She made an very obvious effort to try and protect herself as much as possible, but she failed horribly at that. It was very apparent to me and to everyone else that she was a full partner, a willing participant in every way in the events concerning my victim and the other victims.
People will often view the female of the criminal pair to be the one who is also likely to be a victim as well. And there certainly is some support from that from cases that I've seen. However, there are cases in which the female is the prime mover or oftentimes is just as involved with deviant behavior as the male.
Michelle Michaud implicates herself and DeVeggio in the Reno abduction and rape before she collapses from a mix of exhaustion and methamphetamine withdrawal. On December 4th, the search for Vanessa Samson comes to a heartbreaking end.
Vanessa's body was recovered in down a snowy embankment by a trucker, and he had stopped on the side of the road, and he looked down, and 26 feet down the embankment, Vanessa was there in the snow like a piece of discarded trash. It was terrible. Vanessa's mom prayed for days that she would get her back alive, and then when she got her back, she was just grateful to have her baby back, to give her a proper burial.
My only regret is that we were a day late for Vanessa Samson. If somehow we could have arrested DeVeggio and Michaud the day before, we might have been able to avert Vanessa Samson's death.
James DeVeggio and Michelle Michaud are held at the Douglas County Jail. DeVeggio only speaks through his lawyer.
When we found out that Michaud and DeVeggio were prime suspects in the murder of Vanessa Samson, we immediately told the Douglas County Sheriff's Department that they had potentially someone who might be guilty of murder in their jail. A couple hours later, Douglas County called me back and said Michelle Michaud just came forward to the jail staff and said she wanted to talk to someone about a murder.
DeVeggio insisted that Michaud had done the killing. Michaud says, no, DeVeggio did the killing. Michaud was driving, she says, when the murder occurred. And what it appears is that DeVeggio strangled Vanessa Samson from behind. She stopped the van, went around to the side, opened the door, and that DeVeggio made her put her 2 hands on the rope that was around Vanessa Samson's neck. He turned to her and says, now we're bound together, meaning that they had done this together.
When arrested, criminal pairs will sometimes turn on each other. In fact, that's, in my experience, a more common pattern as they start looking at saving their own skin. These are self-centered people, egotistical and narcissistic, and the only person important to themselves is themselves, usually. And so that's where you'll see them pointing the finger, he made me do it, she made me do it, and back and forth. There is no loyalty among thieves, and certainly among people who are perpetrating these kinds of horrific acts when they're looking at capital murder charges.
On November 16th, 1998, Michelle Michaud pleads guilty in federal court to aiding and abetting in the kidnapping of the Reno victim in exchange for her testimony against James DeVeggio. On May 19th, 1999, James DeVeggio is found guilty and sentenced to 22 years. Both deny any assault on their daughters. the charges are dropped in pursuit of murder charges in the death of Vanessa Samson. In May of 2002, a jury finds both James DeVeggio and Michelle Michaud guilty of the first-degree murder of Vanessa Samson. They are sentenced to death.
James DeVeggio, he is what you see. He's a rapist and a predator and a scumbag. And he became an even better predator with Michelle at his side. Michelle Michaud was a master manipulator. If she wanted Vanessa to live, Vanessa would still be alive today. She could have saved her at the mini-mart where they stopped to get a drink. She could have saved her at the welfare office. She could have saved her at the hotels. She is pure evil to the bone.
James DeVeggio and Michelle Michaud remain on death row as their appeals continue to make their way through the California penal system. But the memory of Vanessa's death still haunts Angela backers.
Every year, just around the time of Vanessa's birthday, her mother has a mass set in her honor at their parish at St. Augustine's. And we go to a noon mass, and then afterwards we go to the graveside, which is nearby. And all of her friends from high school, all of her friends and family, and now there's babies running around. We have a birthday party for her, and we release balloons for her in her honor. And we just toast to her and celebrate her birthday.